The sky burned crimson the night they came. Not the warm crimson of a sunset, but the deep, visceral red of spilled blood and burning metal. Jake Rodriguez stood motionless on the observation deck of Outpost Omega, his reflection a ghost against the reinforced transparent aluminum, a face etched with a lifetime of preparedness. 37 seconds earlier, long-range sensors had picked up the first wave. The alien bioships weren't just massive. They were alive. Organic hulls pulsed with a sickening rhythm, like massive alien hearts beating with predatory anticipation. Each ship was easily the size of a small city, their surfaces a nightmare of shifting biometallic membranes that seemed to breathe and writhe with an intelligence beyond human comprehension. Incoming transmission. The AI's voice was deliberately calm, a programmed attempt to prevent panic. Multiple vectors. Estimated time to first contact. 2 minutes, 17 seconds. Jake's hand hovered over the emergency protocols. This wasn't humanity's first encounter with extraterrestrial life, but it was their first true invasion. The previous encounters had been diplomatic, cautious, brief exchanges that suggested the universe was more interested in observation than conquest. This was different. "Show me," he commanded. The holographic display erupted with data. Sensor readings cascaded like a digital waterfall. Energy signatures that defied known physics, gravitational anomalies that suggested technology centuries beyond human understanding. But Jake saw something else, something the AI hadn't processed. Patterns. Beneath the chaotic assault, there was a rhythm, a logic. The invasion wasn't random. It was calculated with a precision that suggested something more than mere military strategy. This was extinction by design. "Dr. Chen," Jake spoke into the communication array. "Are you seeing this?" Alina Chen's voice crackled back, leaden with a mix of terror and scientific excitement. "It's beautiful," she whispered, "and absolutely horrifying." The first wave hit before anyone could react fully. Outpost Omega's defensive systems, considered the most advanced human technology, responded with a fury of laser and electromagnetic pulses. For a moment, it seemed like they might hold. Then the bioships began to heal. Laser strikes that should have vaporized kilometers of organic hull simply disappeared. The damage rebuilt itself in seconds, the ships absorbing the energy of humanity's most powerful weapons and transforming it into cellular regeneration. Jake's mind raced. 30 years of military training, countless simulations, years of xenological research. Nothing had prepared him for this. "Activate the quantum entanglement protocol," he muttered, more to himself than to anyone listening. The device was a theoretical nightmare, a piece of technology so dangerous that it had been locked away in the deepest vaults of human research. Developed by a team of scientists who were either brilliant or insane. Often, Jake knew, those were the same thing. The quantum entanglement device was less a weapon and more a cosmic question mark. What happened next would be discussed for generations. As Jake's fingers touched the activation sequence, something in the universe shifted. The bioships, those massive living vessels of destruction, simply paused. Not stopped, not destroyed. Paused. Like a computer suddenly caught in an impossible calculation. "What have I done?" Jake whispered. The crimson sky held its breath. Humanity's first true battle for survival had begun. Dr. Elena Kim's laboratory looked like a battlefield of information. Holographic displays cascaded with alien data streams, each screen a kaleidoscope of incomprehensible patterns that would have driven a lesser mind to madness. Her hands moved with a surgeon's precision, fingers dancing across quantum interfaces that hummed with barely contained energy. A captured alien scout sat motionless in a containment field, not restrained by physical barriers, but by a sophisticated neural dampening system that had taken her team 3 sleepless weeks to develop. The creature was something between an organic computer and a living weapon, its biology so fundamentally alien that traditional human scientific understanding collapsed at its mere existence. "Talk to me." Elena muttered, more to herself than to anyone else in the secure research facility. The facility was buried 3 kilometers beneath the Atacama Desert, a location chosen for its isolation and proximity to the most advanced quantum research center on the planet. The quantum entanglement protocol Jake had initiated was doing something impossible. Where most species would have been analyzing the alien technology for decades, humanity was rewriting the very rules of technological adaptation in hours. A junior researcher named Marcus Liu approached, his hands trembling slightly. "Doctor, you need to see this." The holographic display shifted. What had initially appeared as random alien data began to resolve into patterns. Not just patterns, a language. No, more than a language. A complete computational framework that seemed to exist in multiple states simultaneously. "It's not just communication," Elena breathed. "It's a living algorithm." The alien scout twitched. For the first time since its capture, something like fear crossed its alien features. It was watching its own technological framework being dissected, understood, and rapidly repurposed. Humanity had always been different. Where other species saw barriers, humans saw puzzles. Where others accepted limitations, humans saw challenges to be overcome. The alien invasion had triggered something profound, a collective human response that defied every known pattern of conflict. Universities around the world had gone dark, not from destruction, but from an unprecedented mobilization of intellectual resources. Theoretical physicists worked alongside genetic engineers. Computer scientists collaborated with xenobiologists. The boundaries between disciplines dissolved, replaced by a singular, focused purpose. "The neural mapping is recursive," Marcus explained, pointing to a particularly complex data stream. "It's not just storing information, it's constantly rewriting its own operational parameters." Elena's eyes narrowed. This was more than reverse engineering. This was transformation. The captured alien scout began to emit a low, pulsating sound. Not a communication, not a weapon. Something in between. Marcus took an involuntary step back, but Elena remained perfectly still. "It's trying to understand us," she said quietly, "just as we're trying to understand it." Another display flickered to life. Raw data from the quantum entanglement protocol began to resolve into something that defied traditional computational models. It wasn't just analyzing the alien technology. It was learning from it, adapting it, becoming something entirely new. Humanity had always been an experiment in potential, a species defined not by what it was, but by what it could become. The alien scout watched, helpless, as its own technological framework was systematically dismantled and reconstructed into something its creators could never have anticipated. Outside the research facility, the first rays of a new dawn began to break. But this wasn't just another sunrise. This was the dawn of a new kind of warfare, a new kind of existence. Humanity was no longer just responding to the invasion. Humanity was evolving. The bioship's internal architecture defied every principle of known engineering. Corridors pulsed like living arteries, membrane-like walls that breathed and shifted with an organic intelligence that made traditional military infiltration impossible. Commander Marcus Chen moved like a ghost, each step calculated with a precision that bordered on prescience. His team, 6 of the most elite soldiers humanity had ever produced, were more than mere humans now. The neural integration protocols developed by Dr. Elena Kim had transformed them into something hybrid, part human, part living sensor array. Each soldier carried within them a computational capacity that could process entire battlefields in microseconds. "Target acquired," whispered Lieutenant Sarah Rodriguez, her voice a digital undertone that blended human speech with machine precision. Quantum-entangled sensors mapped the bioship's internal structure faster than the ship itself could adapt. This wasn't just an infiltration. It was a deep psychological probe into the very consciousness of the Void Collective. The alien ship's central intelligence became aware of their presence moments after they materialized. But awareness was different from understanding. where most species would have responded with overwhelming force, the infiltration team represented something far more dangerous: a living, adaptive intelligence that could learn and transform faster than any defensive mechanism. Marcus felt the first psychological probe almost immediately. It wasn't a traditional attack, not a weapon in any conventional sense. The ship's consciousness reached out, attempting to dissect their minds, to understand the incomprehensible humans who had dared to penetrate its defenses. What it found was anything but predictable. Instead of fear, the ship encountered a maelstrom of human complexity. Memories cascaded like a quantum tsunami. Moments of love, of loss, of impossible hope. Military training mixed with childhood memories, scientific curiosity intertwined with raw emotional experience. The ship's consciousness found itself drowning in a psychological landscape that defied all its computational models. "They're trying to break us," Marcus communicated silently through the neural network. "But they don't understand what broken means to humans." Each team member became a weapon of a different kind. Sarah's memories of her first scientific breakthrough danced alongside her military training. The ship's consciousness found itself trapped in a recursively complex psychological maze. Humanity wasn't a linear problem to be solved. It was a living, breathing paradox. Lieutenant Rodriguez's neural implants began to do something unexpected. Rather than defending against the psychological assault, they started to analyze it, to understand it, to learn from it. "Fascinating," she whispered, her consciousness expanding beyond her physical form. "They're not just trying to defeat us. They're trying to comprehend us." The bioship's internal systems began to destabilize, not from physical damage, but from a psychological overload. Quantum entanglement protocols turned the very act of observation into a transformative weapon. Each moment of contact rewrote the ship's fundamental understanding of existence. Marcus Chen understood something profound in that moment. Humanity's true strength wasn't in its technology. It wasn't in its military might. It was in its capacity to turn any attack into an opportunity for understanding. The infiltration team wasn't just gathering intelligence. They were conducting the most complex first contact scenario in galactic history. When they finally emerged from the bioship, nothing would be the same. Not for humanity. Not for the Void Collective. Not for the universe itself. The transformation chamber looked like something between a medical facility and a quantum physics laboratory. Liquid metal conduits traced impossible geometric patterns across walls that seemed to breathe and shift with each passing moment. Sarah Rodriguez lay at the center, her body suspended in a field of quantum-entangled energy that defied every known principle of human biology. Dr. Elena Kim watched from behind a reinforced observation window, her hands moving across holographic interfaces with a mixture of scientific precision and barely contained excitement. "Quantum integration at 62%, she muttered, neural pathways realigning. This was humanity's ultimate gambit, the first complete fusion of human consciousness with adaptive technological systems. Where previous attempts had failed, where test subjects had died or been reduced to vegetative states, Sarah represented something entirely new. She had volunteered. More than that, she had insisted. "My father started this," she had told the review board months earlier. "I'm going to finish it." The first flatline came 17 minutes into the procedure. Alarms screamed. Medical AI systems began emergency shutdown protocols. But Elena Kim was beyond traditional medical responses now. This wasn't medicine. This was evolution. "Hold," she commanded. Not to anyone specific. To the universe itself. Sarah's body arched. Quantum neural networks that would have killed any other organism began to stabilize. Her DNA wasn't just adapting. It was rewriting itself in real time, creating new cellular structures that bridged biological and technological domains. The second flatline lasted 3 minutes. When Sarah opened her eyes, the observation room went silent. They were no longer human eyes. Not entirely. Multispectral perception transformed the world into a landscape of interconnected data streams. She could see electromagnetic radiation, quantum fluctuations, biological information flows that existed beyond traditional sensory perception. "I can hear them," Sarah whispered, her voice a complex harmonic that seemed to exist in multiple frequencies simultaneously. Not just the aliens. Everything. The quantum integration had done more than enhance human capabilities. It had fundamentally reimagined what it meant to perceive, to understand, to exist. Dr. Kim approached the transformation chamber. The protective gear she wore seemed suddenly obsolete. Unnecessary. "Report," she said. "A scientific habit. A need for structured information." Sarah turned. The movement was both human and something else entirely. "We're not just fighting anymore," she said. Her voice carried layers of meaning. Linguistic, electromagnetic, quantum. "We're becoming." Outside the research facility, global communication networks began to shift. Not hacked, not controlled, transformed. The quantum entanglement protocol that had begun as a defensive mechanism was spreading, evolving. Humanity was no longer just a species. It was becoming a living, adaptive system. The first generation of resonant soldiers looked human, walked human, but something fundamental had changed. They were the bridge between what humanity was and what humanity could become. The universe would never be the same. The Crimson Nebula burned with the fury of 1,000 dying stars. 2,000 human ships hung suspended in a battle formation that defied every principle of traditional space warfare. At the center of this impossible armada stood the Resonance Fleet, led by Sarah Rodriguez, no longer just a commander, but something far more complex. Her consciousness expanded beyond the physical constraints of her command ship. Quantum entanglement transformed the entire fleet into a single living organism. Each ship was a cell, each crew member a neural pathway. The distinction between individual and collective had become meaningless. "Incoming," she whispered. The word traveled faster than light, a quantum communication that prepared every ship simultaneously. The Void Collective's armada emerged from subspace like a nightmare-given form. Massive bioships that could consume entire star systems, their organic hulls pulsing with a predatory intelligence that had extinguished thousands of civilizations. They had never known defeat. They had never encountered a species like humanity. They were about to learn. The first wave of attack came not as a traditional assault, but as a multi-dimensional psychological probe. Quantum weapons that could shred the fabric of consciousness itself. Weapons that had broken every species they'd ever encountered. Sarah Rodriguez didn't defend. She responded. Each quantum weapon was instantaneously analyzed, understood, and transformed. The Resonance Fleet didn't just absorb the attack, they rewrote its fundamental nature. Weapons designed to destroy became conduits of information. Attacks meant to shatter consciousness became pathways of understanding. "They're trying to break us." Marcus Chen's voice resonated through the quantum network. "Show them what broken really means." The fleet moved as a single entity, not with the rigid precision of traditional military formations, but with the fluid adaptability of a living system. Ships existed simultaneously in multiple quantum states. Attack vectors became impossible to predict. Space itself became a weapon. A bioship the size of a small moon attempted to consume an entire human battle group. Instead, it found itself systematically dismantled, not through brute force, but through a complete deconstruction of its own operational logic. Its biological systems were turned against themselves, a recursive loop of self-destruction that spread like a sentient virus. Sarah watched through perceptions that transcended traditional sensory input. She wasn't just seeing the battle. She was experiencing it, understanding it, becoming it. The Void Collective's communication networks began to collapse, not from external attack, but from an internal transformation. The quantum entanglement protocol didn't just breach their defenses, it reimagined the very concept of defense. "We're not destroying them," Sarah realized. "We're helping them evolve." Each moment of contact rewrote fundamental laws of existence. The battle was no longer about conquest. It was about transformation. When the final bioship fell, It didn't explode. It dissolved, transformed by an intelligence it could never comprehend. The Crimson Nebula went silent. Humanity had done more than win a battle. They had changed the very nature of conflict itself. The research facility beneath the Atacama Desert no longer looked like a military installation. It had become something else entirely, a crucible of transformation that would reshape the very understanding of existence. Dr. Elena Kim stood before a group of captured Void Collective members, her presence both scientific and something more ineffable. The aliens, once conquerors, now something between prisoners and students, watched her with a mixture of terror and desperate curiosity. "You don't understand," she said quietly. "That destruction is the most primitive form of interaction. The quantum technologies developed during humanity's defensive war had become something far more profound. What began as a method of survival was now a pathway to universal understanding." Each captured alien underwent a process that was neither interrogation nor rehabilitation, but a complete reimagining of consciousness. Sarah Rodriguez watched from a quantum-connected observation point, her perception spanning multiple dimensions simultaneously. The neural networks that had begun as a defensive mechanism were now a bridge, a way to translate between fundamentally different forms of intelligence. The first breakthrough came unexpectedly. A Void Collective technician, previously a living weapon of unimaginable destructive capability, began to create. Not weapons, not strategies of conquest. Art, music, conceptual representations of emotions that had previously been impossible within their rigid hierarchical system. Their learning to choose, Sarah communicated to Elena through their quantum link. Not just respond. Choose. The implications were staggering. The Void Collective had been a species defined by consumption, of resources, of civilizations, of potential. Humanity offered something radically different. Not resistance, not submission, but transformation. Marcus Chen entered the facility, his body now as much a quantum computational system as a human organism. Years of military training had evolved into something that defied traditional understanding of leadership, of conflict, of existence itself. "We're not converting them," he explained to the scientific team. "We're providing an alternative, a way of existing that isn't defined by limitation." Captured bioships were no longer weapons. They became research platforms, living laboratories of interspecies understanding. Technologies that had been designed to destroy were systematically reimagined as tools of creation, of communication, of mutual growth. The Quantum Entanglement Protocol, humanity's initial defensive mechanism, had become something far more dangerous than any weapon. It was a virus of potential, an infection of imagination. Covert communications began to spread through galactic networks. Other subjugated species watched in stunned silence. The Void Collective, a civilization that had conquered thousands of worlds, was being transformed from within. Not through military might, but through something far more powerful. Choice, understanding, the capacity to imagine a different way of existing. Elena Kim looked at the transformed aliens and saw something she had always known about humanity. Potential was not a fixed state, it was a continuous process of becoming. The universe would never be the same. Humanity had done more than survive. They had redefined the very concept of survival. The Galactic Council Chamber was unlike any diplomatic space in recorded history. Holographic representations of dozens of species filled the vast, multidimensional space, some physical, some pure energy, some existing in states that defied traditional understanding of consciousness. Marcus Chen stood at the center, no longer just a human representative, but a living embodiment of humanity's transformative potential. His presence was both a diplomatic statement and a quantum communication system, broadcasting layers of information that went far beyond traditional language. "We're not here to conquer," he began, his words simultaneously translated across multiple dimensions, communication spectra, and levels of consciousness. "We're here to show you another way of existing." The chamber fell silent. Representatives from species that had survived millions of years of galactic conflict found themselves confronting something entirely unprecedented. Humanity wasn't offering an alliance, wasn't demanding reparations, wasn't seeking dominance. They were offering a fundamental reimagining of existence. Sarah Rodriguez's consciousness threaded through the diplomatic network, a quantum presence that made traditional communication look like primitive signaling, where previous diplomatic encounters had been exercises in carefully managed tension. This was something else entirely. A living dialogue. The Zarn Collective, once considered the most advanced diplomatic species in the galaxy, found their entire communication framework dismantled. Not through aggression, but through a method of interaction that rendered their traditional approaches obsolete. Your hierarchical systems are a limitation. Sarah communicated, her message a complex quantum transmission that was simultaneously a mathematical proof, an emotional experience, and a technological blueprint. Existence is not about control. It's about potential. Captured Void Collective representatives, now transformed into something between ambassadors and living research platforms, provided living testimony to humanity's approach. They weren't victims. They weren't conquerors. They were participants in a radical process of mutual transformation. Dr. Elena Kim's research had become more than scientific documentation. It was a new form of universal communication. Technologies developed during the conflict were systematically shared, not as weapons, but as tools of mutual understanding. Quantum entanglement protocols that had begun as defensive mechanisms were reimagined as communication networks that could bridge fundamentally different forms of consciousness. Species that had existed in isolation for millennia suddenly found themselves part of a living, adaptive network. "We're not asking you to become like us," Marcus explained. "We're inviting you to become more of what you already are." The diplomatic breakthrough was unlike anything in galactic history. It wasn't a treaty. It wasn't a trade agreement. It was an invitation to a different way of understanding existence itself. Some species would resist. Some would be terrified. Some would be transformed. But none would remain unchanged. Humanity had done more than survive a galactic conflict. They had transformed the very concept of interaction. The universe watched and began to change. Sarah Rodriguez stood at the edge of human-known space, her consciousness spanning dimensions that would have driven lesser beings to madness. The universe looked different now, no longer a collection of separate entities, but a living, breathing ecosystem of potential. The transformation was complete, yet never-ending. Humanity was no longer just a species. They had become a catalyst, a living system of adaptation, understanding, and continuous evolution. The technologies developed during the conflict with the Void Collective had rewritten fundamental laws of existence. Commander Marcus Chen's neural network interfaced with her consciousness, a quantum connection that transcended traditional communication. "We've done more than survive," he communicated. Not in words, but in a complex symphony of mathematical probability, emotional resonance, and pure potential. The research facilities that had once been hidden beneath the Atacama Desert now orbited multiple star systems. Each was a living laboratory, a testament to humanity's capacity for reimagining existence. Dr. Elena Kim's original work had become something far beyond scientific research. It was a universal language of transformation. Captured Void Collective technologies had been systematically decoded, understood, and integrated, not as weapons, not as conquests, but as pathways of mutual understanding. Species that had existed in isolation for millennia now found themselves part of a living, adaptive network that defied every previous concept of communication. The Quantum Entanglement Protocol, humanity's initial defensive mechanism, had become the primary method of interstellar interaction. It was more than a technology. It was a philosophy, a way of existing that transformed conflict into opportunity, limitation into potential. Sarah reflected on the journey, the first encounters that seemed like certain extinction. The moment her father, Jake Rodriguez, had activated the quantum protocol. The transformation that had turned humans from a seemingly fragile species into something more. Not superior, not dominant, something else entirely. A living bridge between what was and what could be. The surviving members of the Void Collective were no longer conquerors. They had become partners in a grand experiment of mutual evolution. Their hierarchical systems had been dismantled, replaced by a more dynamic, adaptive approach inspired by human resilience. We're not finished. Alina's consciousness resonated through the quantum network. We're just beginning. Entire civilizations were being reimagined. Technologies that had once been weapons became tools of creation. Communication systems that had maintained rigid separations now became pathways of mutual understanding. The universe had changed, not through conquest, not through destruction, but through the most dangerous weapon humanity had ever discovered: imagination, the capacity to see beyond what is, to understand what could be. Sarah looked out across the infinite potential of space. The boundaries between species, between technology and consciousness, between limitation and possibility, all were dissolving. Humanity had become more than a species, more than a civilization. They were a force of transformation, and the universe would never be the same.